The Zenith Spire Academy did not tolerate inefficiency. Every shadow cast upon the obsidian training floor was measured, every drop of recycled moisture accounted for by the environmental processors. High above the reinforced combat mats, the atmospheric stabilizers hummed at a low 42 Hz frequency, a sound that Silas Zant found deeply comforting. As a Zirconite, her existence was a series of geometric certainties and thermal exchanges. She stood by the weapons rack, her crystalline limbs refracting the overhead lumens into soft shades of cerulean. Her four eyes, arranged in a precise diamond pattern on her faceted face, flickered across her data slate. She was currently cross-referencing the friction coefficients of the new practice floor with the expected performance of 26 different species. Gravity calibration is 0.04% above standard, Silas Sant announced, her voice a resonant chime that vibrated through the air. Adjust your stance accordingly, Cadet Thorne. 17 meters away, seated in the center of a wide practice mat, the human did not look up. Elias Thorne was the embodiment of the color gray. His regulation uniform was perfectly clean, but lacked the sharp press of the Vespoid warriors or the shimmering pride of the Lithans. He was currently moving a stylus across a data slate with a rhythmic, almost hypnotic pace. Noted instructor Silas Zant, he replied. His voice was flat, devoid of the aggressive harmonics common in the combat tracks. Silas Zant's internal matrix pulsed with a flicker of amethyst. In 3 months of instruction, Elias Thorne had become her most puzzling data point. He was not a failure, which would have allowed her to dismiss him. Nor was he an overachiever, which would have required extra resources. He was precisely average. He attended every lecture, took exhaustive notes, and performed every drill with the bare minimum effort required to achieve a passing grade. He never volunteered. He never complained. He was a ghost in a room full of titans. The heavy bay doors hissed open, the hydraulic pressure releasing with a sharp puff of steam. Cadet Krax entered, his insectoid exoskeleton gleaming a predatory emerald under the lights. Behind him followed 3 other Vespoids, their mandibles clicking in a rapid private dialect. Krax was the apex of his class, strong, fast, and painfully aware of his own genetic superiority. Instructor Zant, Krax said, his voice a series of harsh rasps filtered through a translator. He snapped his primary arms into a rigid military salute, while his secondary limbs remained tucked against his thorax. I have completed the high-velocity maneuvers in Sector 4. My efficiency rating was 98%. Sure, Mum. Your dedication to the syllabus is noted, Cadet Krax, Silas Sant replied, her body remaining a neutral blue. However, your thermal output during the drill was 6% higher than optimal. You are wasting energy on flare. Krax's antennae twitched, a sign of irritation he couldn't quite suppress. He turned his compound eyes toward the center of the room, where Elias remained seated, still scratching away at his slate. Still scribbling, human? Krax asked, his mandibles widening in a Vespoid sneer. I heard the logistics department is looking for box kickers. Perhaps you should bug out before the real combat simulations begin. Elias Thorne didn't even pause his stylus. I like the view from here, Krax. It's quiet. The Vespoid walked toward the mat, his chitinous feet clicking sharply against the obsidian. Quiet? Yes, like a grave. Tell me, instructor, has this primate even qualified for basic melee yet? Or is he still classified as fragile? Silas Sant adjusted her grip on her slate. Cadet Thorne has met all mandatory requirements. His status is adequate. Now take your positions. We are beginning the kinetic redirection drills. She turned toward the control console embedded in the far wall, her fingers dancing over the haptic interface. She was annoyed, not because of Krax's arrogance. That was a biological constant for his species. Nung V, the gravity alarm, was now chirping at 0.05% variance. It was a minor discrepancy, a microscopic error in the Spire's vast systems, but to a Zirconite, it was a splinter in the mind. I must initiate a diagnostic sweep, Silas Sant said, her back to the class. Cadet Krax, maintain discipline. Do not engage in unauthorized sparring while the safety dampeners are recalibrating. Of course, instructor, Krax hissed. Silas Sant leaned into the console, her 4 eyes scanning lines of code. She was distantly aware of the Vespoids fanning out, their movements echoing in the large chamber. She heard the soft click-clack of their private communication frequency. They were moving into a standard flanking formation, a pincer movement they had learned 2 weeks ago. Behind her, the air grew heavy. The silence of the human was a void that the Vespoids seemed determined to fill. Integration is a requirement of this academy, Thorn. Krax's voice was closer now, dripping with a false sense of duty. We think you need a practical demonstration of Vespoid speed. To help your notes. Silas Zant found the error in the gravity core. A sensor cluster in the subfloor was vibrating at the wrong frequency. She reached for a subspatial wrench, her mind entirely focused on the mathematics of the machine. "That's very kind of you," she heard Elias say. His tone was as dry as the deserts of Valonus Prime. "It's only fair," another Vespoid voice added. "We wouldn't want you to flatline during the finals because you weren't prepared for a real hit." Silas Zant's fingers froze on the wrench. Logic dictated she should turn around. The Vespoids were clearly violating the non-engagement protocol, but the diagnostic readout showed the gravity variance was now 0.06%. The machine was her priority. The human was adequate. He could handle a minor scuffle. Then the sound happened. It wasn't the sound of a fight. There were no grunts of exertion, no prolonged struggle. There were 4 distinct wet thuds, followed by the sound of high-tensile kitten cracking like dry glass. Something heavy impacted the ceiling with enough force to make the lights flicker. Another sound followed, a sickening crunch of reinforced polymer meeting a solid object. Silas Zant spun around, her internal light matrix flashing a panicked, jagged red. The training hall was no longer a place of order. Krax was standing in the center of the room, his antennae vibrating so hard they were a blur. He was frozen, his primary arms half raised in a strike position that would never be completed. Around him, his 3 companions had been erased from the mat. One Vespoid was embedded shoulder deep into the reinforced wall 30 meters away, his legs kicking weakly in the air. The impact had shattered the observation glass behind him. Another was tangled in the overhead light fixtures, 12 meters above the floor, hanging by a broken wing casing. The third cadet was simply folded. He lay on the mat in a shape that violated every law of Vespoid anatomy, his limbs tucked behind his back in a self-inflicted knot of his own exoskeleton. Elias Thorn was still sitting cross-legged on his mat. His stylus was moving across his slate. He looked up, his brown eyes meeting Silas Zant's 4 eyes for exactly 1 second. "The gravity is still off, instructor," Elias said calmly. Silas Zant's body shifted to a deep, trembling violet. Her stress chiming began, a high-pitched ringing that filled the hall. What happened?" "They slipped," Elias said. He tapped his stylus against the slate. "It's very dangerous when the calibration is off by 0.06%. Non-human locomotion is clearly sensitive to microvariances." Krax finally found his voice, though it was more of a broken whistle. It wasn't even, I didn't see it." "See what, Cadet Krax?" Silas Zant asked, her limbs trembling as she stepped toward the wreckage of her classroom. "His hand," Krax whispered, his compound eyes reflecting the human in 1,000 terrified fragments. His hand came up once. I didn't even see the blur. Then they were just gone, like they were hit by a shuttle." Elias Thorn stood up slowly. He didn't use his hands for leverage. He simply rose in one fluid, terrifyingly efficient motion. He held his data slate in one hand, dangling it casually. "I'll go call medical," Elias said, his uniform still without a single wrinkle. "They look like they're having a bad day." The medical bay smelled of ozone and shattered confidence. Silas Zant stood by the primary regeneration pod, her crystalline body a troubled, dark purple. She watched as a medical droid worked on the Vespoid hanging from the ceiling support. The droid was clicking in distress. It couldn't figure out the physics required to wedge the cadet out without causing further structural damage to the building. "His joints are dislocated in 3 different directions," the medic, a spindly creature of the Glick species, muttered. "Instructor, how is this possible? These injuries look like they were caused by a pneumatic press, not a fellow student." "The human claims they slipped," Silas Zant replied, her voice echoing with a hollow chime. "Slipped?" The medic looked at the Vespoid embedded in the wall. "Into the ceiling? Against the wind?" Instructor, I'm looking at the skeletal scans. This cadet has compression fractures consistent with a fall from 500 meters, but he only traveled 12 meters. The sheer acceleration required to do this would liquefy a normal organism. Silas Sant turned her gaze to the far end of the bay. Elias Thorne was sitting on a bench, calmly reviewing his notes. He looked like a bored accountant waiting for a bus. His heart rate, according to the bay's ambient sensors, was a steady 60 beats per minute. He wasn't even sweating. "Cadet Thorne," Silas Sant called out, her tone sharper than usual. Elias looked up. "Yes, instructor?" "Come here." The human walked over, his footsteps barely making a sound on the sterile floor. Silas Sant reached into the equipment dispensary and pulled out a standard reflex sphere, a small silver orb used for testing the reaction times of high-tier species. "I am going to throw this," Silas Sant said. "Catch it." She threw the ball. It was a gentle toss, the kind one might use for a child. Elias caught it with his left hand. Silas Sant's eyes narrowed. Again. This time she threw it with the full force of her crystalline musculature. To a Vespoid, it would have been a blur. To most species, it would have been invisible. The sphere hissed through the air, vibrating with kinetic energy. Elias's hand was suddenly there. There was no transition, no movement her eyes could track. One moment his hand was at his side. The next, the sphere was held firmly between his thumb and forefinger. The impact made a dull thud against his palm, but his arm didn't move an inch. "Good catch," Elias said, handing the ball back. Silas Sant felt a fracture of fear in her core matrix. "You didn't even look at the sphere, Elias. You were looking at the medic." "I heard it," Elias replied. "The air displacement. It's got a specific frequency when it travels at that velocity. Simple physics." "Catching a high-velocity projectile by sound is not simple physics," Silas Sant hissed, her body turning a warning shade of crimson. "It is a biological impossibility for a Class 3 species." "Maybe the classification is wrong," Elias suggested, his face remaining a mask of aggressive neutrality. Silas Sant didn't respond. She turned and walked toward the communication terminal at the back of the medical bay. Her fingers trembled as she bypassed the Academy's local servers and established a direct, high-encryption link to the Hegemony's Central Integration Bureau. "This is Instructor Silas Sant, ID Z981, she chimed into the receiver. "I need an immediate unmasking of the Earth-Sol 3 integration file. Full footnotes. I have a Class 7 incident in progress." The screen flickered. A bored-looking Torvin official appeared, his 6 eyes blinking in sequence. "Earth? That's a new one. Very reasonable people, the humans. Their ambassador even brought us some processed cocoa. Why do you need an unmasking?" "Because one of their reasonable people just put 3 Vespoid warriors into the infrastructure of my academy without standing up," Silas Sant snapped. "Send the file. Now." The official sighed, his fingers moving across his own console. "Fine. Sending now. Though I don't see what the fuss is about. Their summary says they are resilient and adaptable." A data packet slammed into Silas Sant's slate. She opened it, her 4 eyes scanning the text with terrifying speed. Silas Sant felt her internal matrix go cold. She looked at the last line of the report. "Mostly harmless," Silas Sant whispered. She looked back at Elias. He had picked up a small tool the medic had dropped. He was holding it between 2 fingers, looking at the serial number. He didn't seem to notice that he was currently exerting enough pressure to dent the tool's reinforced casing. "Instructor," Krax called out from his bed. He looked smaller now, his exoskeleton dull and cracked. "What is he? Is he a bioengineered weapon?" Silas Sant walked back to Elias. She stood 3 meters away, a distance she now realized was woefully insufficient for safety. "Cadet Thorne," she said, her voice dropping to a low, somber frequency. "Why are you in the logistics program?" Elias finally smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator that had spent a very long time pretending to be a sheep. "Because, instructor," Elias said, his voice dropping an octave, "in logistics, you don't have to hit anyone. You just move boxes. Boxes don't break when you pick them up too fast. People do." Silas Sant looked at the Vespoids. She looked at the hole in the wall. She looked at the human who was currently the most dangerous object in Sector 7. "The logistics program is over for you, Elias," Silasant said. You are being moved to a new category. What category? Elias asked. Deathworlder, Silasant replied, her body shifting to a resigned, fatalistic blue. Population 1. And I'm going to spend the next 7 months making sure you don't accidentally deconstruct my planet. Elias Thorne went back to his slate, his stylus scratching against the screen. Does this mean I get more homework? It means everyone else does, Silasant muttered, starting with a lesson on why you should never, ever jump the quiet ones. The atmospheric scrubbers in the high-threat assessment chamber hummed with a frantic metallic urgency, struggling to filter the scent of ozone and the underlying metallic tang of Vespoid hemolymph. Silasant stood behind a reinforced partition of transparent durasteel, her crystalline form pulsing with a jagged, uneven violet light. She was no longer just an instructor. She felt like a scientist standing at the edge of an event horizon, watching the laws of physics slowly unravel in the shape of a seated human. Elias Thorne sat on a diagnostic plinth in the center of the chamber. He had been stripped of his outer regulation jacket, revealing a torso that to Silasant's 4 eyes looked alarmingly fragile. Humans lacked the chitinous armor of the Vespoids, the internal reinforced lattice of the Zirconites, or the adaptive hide of the Torvan. They were soft, wet, and seemingly held together by nothing more than thin skin and stubbornness. Across from her, Dr. Vrel, a Glix medical officer with a dozen spindly, translucent limbs, was frantically tapping at a holographic array. The blue glow of the data reflected off Vrel's bulbous eyes, which were dilated to their maximum diameter. Instructor, I have recalibrated the sensors 3 times, Vrel chirped, his voice rising into a frequency of pure agitation. The readings remain consistent. His resting bone density is 600% above the galactic baseline for a bipedal organism of this mass. 600%! It's like he's walking around with a skeleton made of reinforced structural girders. And the muscular fiber? Silasant asked, her internal resonance chiming with a low, mournful tone. It's not just the density, Vrel replied, several limbs twitching in a gesture of professional disbelief. It's the recruitment. Most species have a biological limiter, a fail-safe that prevents the brain from commanding the muscles to exert force beyond what the tendons can handle. It stops you from tearing yourself apart. But this human, his limiters are set to zero dark nothing. If he feels a certain way, his brain can bypass every safety protocol. It's called an adrenaline spike. In that state, his strength isn't just high, it's catastrophic. Silasant looked through the glass at Elias. Cadet Thorne, do you understand what the doctor is saying? You are a walking breach of safety protocols. Elias looked at his hands, turning them over slowly. I've heard it before, instructor. Back on Earth, they don't tell us we're special. They just tell us to be careful around the furniture. I spent 20 years thinking I was just a clumsy kid who broke things. Then I get out here into the hegemony, and suddenly I'm a heavy hitter because I can catch a ball without thinking. You didn't just catch a ball, Elias. Silasant's voice vibrated with a sharp, crystalline edge. You neutralized 4 trained combatants in less than 0.2 seconds. My sensors didn't even register a threat response. You were bored. I wasn't bored, Elias countered, his voice remaining terrifyingly level. I was annoyed. There's a difference. Those Vespoids were being real jerks, acting like they owned the mat. Back home, you deal with guys like that by shutting them down before they can get their rhythm. It's a peacekeeping measure. A quick stop, then back to your business. I didn't mean to put them in the ceiling. The gravity really was a bit scagged. Silasant's internal light matrix flickered to a dull, worried blue. She felt a phantom pain in her primary lateral facet, a slow, creeping decay of her crystalline resonance that she had been hiding for 20 years. It was the price of age, the slow shattering of a Zirconite's soul. Looking at Elias, she felt a strange, illogical envy. He was so full of violent, raw life that he didn't even know how to contain it. We are going to perform a stress test, she announced, her voice regaining its professional chime. Vrel, activate the Tier 5 kinetic resistance pylon. We need to measure the human's peak impact force. Instructor? Vrel hesitated, his limbs curling inward. Tier 5 is for siegebreaker droids and armored walkers. It's a bit much for a civvy in a logistics jumpsuit, isn't it? Elias Thorne is not a civvy anymore, Sillisant said, her eyes fixed on the human. He is an unknown variable, and in my 400 years of teaching, I have learned that the only way to deal with an unknown is to find its breaking point. Elias stood up from the plinth. He didn't look intimidated. If anything, he looked tired, like a man who had been asked to perform a parlor trick one too many times. Just tell me where to hit it, instructor. A massive obsidian-colored pillar rose from the floor of the chamber. It was wrapped in layers of grav-dampening foam and sensor mesh, designed to absorb and measure the force of a small asteroid impact. It looked like a monolith of solid, immovable authority. Strike the center, Sillisant commanded. Use your maximum effort. Do not hold back for the sake of the facility. Elias walked toward the pylon. He didn't take a combat stance. He didn't breathe in a controlled, rhythmic pattern like a Lithan warrior or hiss like a Vespoid preparing for a strike. He just stood there for a moment, his shoulders drooping slightly. Then he shifted his weight. It was the first time Sillisant truly saw the human move when he wasn't trying to hide. The air in the chamber didn't just move, it cracked. A shockwave of displaced atmosphere hit the Durasteel partition with a sound like a thunderclap. Elias's arm didn't look like an arm anymore. It was a blur of kinetic energy, a whip made of bone and dense muscle. His fist connected with the Tier 5 pylon with a sound that Sillisant would remember for the rest of her long life. It wasn't a hit, it was an explosion. The grav-dampening foam didn't just compress, it vaporized. The sensor mesh screamed, its holographic readouts flaring bright white before shorting out. The pylon, designed to stay rooted in the floor under 40 tons of pressure, groaned as the floor anchors sheared clean off. The massive obsidian pillar skidded back 3 meters, carving a deep, jagged trench into the reinforced floor. Silence followed. A thick, heavy silence that felt like it was pressing against Sillisant's crystalline skin. Dr. Vrel dropped his data slate. It shattered on the floor, but he didn't seem to notice. The readout, he whispered, his voice cracking. It peaked at 12,000 kilonewtons before the sensor died. That's not biological. That's a railgun hit. Elias pulled his hand back. His knuckles were slightly red, but otherwise he looked fine. He shook his hand out, a casual, human gesture that made the sheer magnitude of what he'd just done feel even more absurd. Man, that thing is solid, Elias said, looking at the dented pylon. I think I felt my wrist pop a bit. I probably shouldn't do that too often. Sillisant's body was a solid, vibrating red. Her stress chiming was so loud it was making the glass hum. 12,000 kilonewtons, she repeated, the words feeling like shards of glass in her mind. And you said you were untrained? I am untrained, Elias said, turning to face the partition. He looked Sillisant directly in her primary eyes, his expression suddenly very sober. That's what you people don't get. Back on Earth, if I did that to someone, I'd be in a cell for the rest of my life. We spend every second of every day holding back. We walk softly because we have to. We learn to control ourselves because if we don't, we're monsters. I'm not a soldier instructor. I'm just a guy who knows how to keep the monster in the basement. Nahon. The hegemony gave you a logistics assignment, Sillisant said, her chime fading into a low, somber tone. They saw your academic scores and thought you were a drone. They didn't read the footnotes. They didn't look at where you came from. They just saw a quiet human and made a judgment. They were right to be afraid, Dr. Vrel piped up, his limbs still trembling. If the council knew that a single untrained human could do that, the integration protocols would be scrapped in an hour. They'd quarantine Sol 3 behind a planetary shield. They won't, Sillisant said, her light shifting back to a determined purple. Because Cadet Thorne is under my jurisdiction, and my mandate is to ensure that every student reaches their full potential while maintaining the safety of the spire. Instructor with respect, Vrel said, you can't teach a walking apocalypse. There is no curriculum for this. There is now, Sillisant replied. She pressed a button on her console, opening the airlock to the assessment chamber. She stepped inside, the loose atmosphere swirling around her crystalline limbs. She walked right up to Elias Thorne, standing less than a meter away from the man who could shatter her into 1,000,000 fragments with a single movement. Elias, she said, her resonance firm and clear, You said you keep the monster in the basement. I am going to teach you how to let it out on a leash. I am going to teach you the difference between being a danger and being a weapon. And in return, you are going to tell me the truth about why a biological containment officer is enrolled in a basic combat class under a false ID. Elias stiffened. The neutral mask he had been wearing finally slipped, revealing a flash of something hard and sharp in his eyes. How long have you known? He asked quietly. I am 400 years old, Elias, Silasant said, her light pulsing with a secret internal rhythm. I have taught 17,000 students. I know when someone is taking notes on gravity calibration, and I know when someone is taking notes on the structural weaknesses of a space station. You weren't just being adequate, you were being invisible, and in my experience, the only people who try that hard to be invisible are the ones who are hunting something. Elias looked around the empty, ruined chamber. He let out a long, slow breath. I'm not hunting anything, instructor. I'm just making sure the rest of you don't find out how scagged the galaxy really is. But if we're going to do this, if you're really going to teach me, then we need to move. The Vespoid High Command is going to want blood for what happened to Krax and his crew, and they don't play by the Academy's rules. Then we will find a place where the rules don't matter, Silasant said. Pack your data slate, cadet. Your logistics internship just ended. Welcome to Sector 9. Sector 9 was not a part of the Zenith Spire that appeared on any official map. It was a subterranean blister, a massive hollowed-out cavern 2 kilometers beneath the mountain's crust, once used for testing experimental warp drives before the radiation leak of 50 years ago made it a ghost town. The air down here was thick with the smell of wet stone and old machinery, and the only light came from the dim, flickering amber of emergency power strips. Silasant led the way, her crystalline body acting as a natural lantern, casting long, shifting shadows against the rough-hewn walls. Behind her, Elias Thorne walked with a heavy, steady tread, his gear bag slung over one shoulder as if it weighed nothing at all. This place is off the grid, Silasant explained, her voice echoing in the vast space. The sensors are outdated, and the reinforced walls are 4 meters thick. It is the only place on this station where you can exert your full physical parameters without triggering a station-wide breach alarm. Feels like home, Elias muttered, glancing at a rusted crane that had been left to rot in a corner. Dark, cold, and smells like something died here. My kind of hardpoint. Silasant stopped in the center of a wide circular platform that had once been a containment field for a fusion reactor. She turned to face him, her internal light fading to a soft, contemplative lavender. You mentioned the Vespoids, she said. Krax is the son of an admiral. His pride is wounded, which means his father's pride is wounded. In their culture, an injury caused by an unclassified species is an insult that requires a blood price. They will try to have you deported or worse. Why are you really here, Elias? The truth this time. No more bunk about logistics. Elias dropped his bag. The sound it made as it hit the metal platform was far too heavy for a simple kit bag. He reached inside and pulled out a small black device that looked like a jagged piece of obsidian. This is a Cortex link, he said, holding it up. It's illegal in 30 systems. It's designed to synchronize a human brain with local sensor nets. I'm a BCO, yeah, but I'm not here to hunt. I'm here to monitor the Deathworld contagion. Silasant's light pulsed with a sharp, inquisitive yellow. Contagion? Human biology is not infectious. Not the biology, Elias said, his voice dropping. The idea. Earth joined the Council 6 months ago. Since then, 3 other low-threat species have started asking for reevaluation. They see us, this quiet, weird race that doesn't follow the Great Tearing, and they start thinking they don't have to follow it either. The Council is terrified that the hierarchy they've built for 10,000 years is going to fall apart because humans make the Tier 1 species look like wet noodles. So you are here to play the part of the adequate student to prove that humans are not a threat? Silasant asked. Exactly. I was supposed to be the middle-of-the-road guy, the one who works hard, stays quiet, and barely passes. I was supposed to show that humans are just another cog in the machine. But then Krax had to be a hero. He pushed, and I didn't push back. I just forgot to hold back. The danger of prejudice, Silasant chimed softly. He judged you by your appearance, and you judged him by his arrogance. Both of you failed to see the reality of the other. Yeah, well, reality has a way of hitting you in the face, Elias said. He looked around the dark cavern. What now, instructor? You said you'd teach me control. How do you teach a mountain not to fall over? By teaching the mountain that it has a choice, Silasant replied. She walked to a control panel and began entering a sequence. From the ceiling, a dozen robotic arms descended, each one tipped with a precision sensor and a high-energy stun baton. These are calibrated for Vespoid elite guards, she said. They are fast, unpredictable, and they will hit you with 10,000 volts if you fail to intercept them. But here's the catch. You are not allowed to break them. Elias looked at the humming batons. You want me to play tag with a dozen robots that can stop a heart, and I have to be gentle? Instructor, that's like asking a hurricane to perform open-heart surgery. Precisely, Silasant said, her light shifting to a challenging red. Power without control is just a disaster waiting to happen. To be a weapon is easy. To be a shield, that requires a level of focus you haven't even touched yet. You must learn to feel the resistance of the world around you. You must learn to move through the air without shattering it. If you break one of these arms, we start over. If you get hit, you will feel the pain. Do you accept? Elias stripped off his regulation shirt, tossing it onto his bag. His skin was pale in the amber light, his muscles corded and dense like twisted cables. He looked up at the robotic arms, his eyes narrowing. Let's move, he said. Silasant engaged the sequence. The arms moved with a mechanical screech. They were a blur of chrome and electrical arcs, coming from every angle. Elias didn't jump back. He didn't explode into a flurry of motion. Instead, he did something that made Silasant's internal processors stutter in surprise. He closed his eyes. He stood in the center of the platform, his body perfectly still. When the first baton swung toward his head at 80 kilometers an hour, he didn't duck. He simply tilted his head 2 centimeters to the left. The baton hissed past his ear, missing him by a fraction of a millimeter. The next 3 arms came from behind, a coordinated strike aimed at his legs and kidneys. Elias moved like water. He didn't step. He drifted. He caught the first arm with 2 fingers, not gripping it, but merely redirecting its momentum so it collided with the second arm. The third arm he deflected with the back of his hand, a touch so light it didn't even leave a mark on the robot's casing. For the next 10 minutes, Silasant watched a dance that defied everything she knew about human biology. Elias wasn't fighting the machines. He was harmonizing with them. He was moving within the gaps of their programming, his body reacting to the displacement of air, the hum of their motors, the very static in the atmosphere. He was a ghost in the machine. But then the stress started to show. Silasant saw the sweat begin to beat on his forehead. She saw the way his muscles were twitching, a microscopic tremor that suggested he was fighting a war within his own nervous system. His heart rate is climbing, Silasant noted to herself, her eyes tracking his vitals on her slate. 180, 200, 220. He's pushing into the adrenaline red line. Suddenly, one of the robotic arms malfunctioned, a legacy of the old radiation damage in Sector 9. It didn't swing, it lunged, its motor surging with an unexpected burst of power. It was moving too fast for a redirected touch. Elias's eyes snapped open. For a split second, the monster in the basement looked out. His hand shot out, his fingers closing around the robotic arm with the force of a hydraulic shear. The reinforced steel groaned and space crumpled like a soda can. The motor exploded in a shower of sparks as Elias ripped the arm clean out of its ceiling mount. He spun, the momentum of the pull carrying him into a low crouch, his other hand slamming into the metal platform. The impact dented the floor, a 2-meter-wide crater appearing where his palm had landed. The other robotic arms instantly retracted, their safety protocols finally kicking in. The cavern fell back into its amber silence, save for the sound of Elias's heavy, ragged breathing. He stood up, looking at the mangled robotic arm in his hand. He looked like he wanted to be sick. "I broke it," he whispered. "I was doing so well, and I felt it coming, and I snapped." Silasant stepped onto the platform, her light a gentle, soothing violet. She walked over to him and, for the first time, placed a crystalline hand on his bare shoulder. He was burning hot, his skin radiating a feverish heat from the sheer intensity of his internal exertion. "You didn't snap, Elias," she said softly. "You reacted to a malfunction. You protected yourself. That is not a failure of control. It is a success of survival." "It doesn't feel like it," Elias said, his voice trembling. "It feels like I'm one bad day away from tearing this whole station apart. You saw what I did to that arm. Imagine if that was cracks. Imagine if that was you." "I am not afraid of you, Elias Thorne," Silasant said, and she realized with a start that it was the truth. "Because I see the struggle. A true monster wouldn't care that the arm was broken. A true monster wouldn't be sweating from the effort of holding back. You are not your strength. You are the will that restrains it." Elias looked at her, his brown eyes searching her fasted face. "Why are you doing this, Silas? You're a 400-year-old Zirconite. You should be retired on some luxury moon, not hiding in a radioactive basement with a Class 7 threat." Silas Sant looked away, her light flickering as a sharp, cold pain shot through her primary facet. "Because I am also a monster, Elias. In my own way. I am shattering. My resonance is decaying. In a few years, I will be nothing but a pile of inert glass. I spent my whole life being the perfect instructor, the perfect logical machine. And now at the end, I find that I don't want to leave a legacy of perfect grades. I want to leave a legacy of understanding." She looked back at him, her light stabilizing. "We are both flawed, Cadet. You have too much life, and I have too little. Perhaps together, we can find a way to make it through the finals." Elias managed a small, tired grin. "A dying crystal and a walking railgun. We really are the skagged-out crew of the year, aren't we?" "Colloquially speaking, yes," Silasant chimed, a faint hint of humor in her resonance. "Now pick up that mangled arm. We need to dispose of the evidence before the maintenance droids do a sweep. We have 6 hours before the morning session begins, and you still haven't learned how to throw a punch that only bruises." "Only bruises?" Elias sighed, picking up the arm. "I'll try, instructor, but no promises on the furniture." As they walked back toward the lift, Silas Zant felt a strange, new resonance in her core. It wasn't the decay, it was something else, a vibration of purpose. She had spent centuries judging her students by their tier rankings and their test scores. She had seen the galaxy as a collection of data points, a vast logical machine. But as she watched Elias Thorne struggle to walk without denting the metal floor, she realized that the most important things in the universe were the things that couldn't be measured. The things in the footnotes, the quiet choices made in the dark. She looked up at the ceiling of the cavern, thinking of the 4 Vespoids in the medical bay. They had been victims of their own prejudice, but she had been a victim of her own logic. She had nearly missed the most important lesson of her career because it didn't fit into a standard syllabus. "Elias," she said as the lift doors hissed open. "Yeah? Don't worry about being a monster. The monsters are the ones who don't think they are. As long as you're afraid of your own power, you're the safest man in this galaxy." "Thanks, Silas," Elias said, stepping into the lift. "I think that's the weirdest compliment I've ever gotten." "Get used to it," she replied. "We have a lot of work to do." As the lift ascended toward the bright, orderly world of the Zenith Spire, the amber darkness of Sector 9 swallowed the ruins of the Tier 5 pylon, leaving only the jagged trench in the floor as a testament to the power of a human who just wanted to be average. The seeds of the lesson had been planted, buried deep beneath the earth. Silas Sant didn't know if they would bloom in time to save Elias from the Vespoid Admiral, or if they would just make the coming storm more painful. But for the first time in 400 years, she was excited to see what happened next. She was no longer just an instructor, she was a witness to the impossible. And for a Zirconite, that was the highest form of resonance. As they reached the upper levels, the station's intercom chimed with the announcement of the 0600 hour. The morning session was beginning. Somewhere in the spire, Admiral Crack's Toll was likely preparing his formal complaint to the Council. Somewhere else, the human embassy was likely drafting a new set of mostly harmless footnotes. But down in the training facility, under the watchful eyes of a 400-year-old crystal, a human was going to learn how to be a shadow. And a shadow, Silas Sant knew, was much harder to kill than a titan. The administrative sanctum of the Zenith Spire was a place of suffocating geometry. Every pillar was a perfect octahedron, every window a precise slit designed to let in exactly 3 lumens of ambient starlight per square inch. It was a space built to remind its occupants that the hegemony was eternal, ordered, and entirely unforgiving of outliers. Silas Zant felt her internal matrix pulsing with a sharp, discordant yellow as she stood before the High Council's holographic projector. Across the room, Admiral Crax Toll did not stand. He loomed. His exoskeleton was not the vibrant emerald of his son, but a deep, bruised indigo, scarred by a century of border skirmishes and internal purges. He wore a high-collared mantle of rank made from the crushed shells of defeated rivals, and his 4 primary arms were crossed in a gesture of absolute, unyielding authority. "Instructor Zant," the Admiral hissed, his voice a dry rasp that sounded like sandpaper on bone. "You have been a dedicated servant of this academy for 400 years. Your record is pristine. Your logic is respected, which is why I find it difficult to understand why you are currently sheltering a biological weapon in a radioactive basement." "Admiral," Silasant replied, her chime steady despite the microfractures spreading through her lateral facets. "Cadet Thorn is not a weapon. He is a student enrolled under standard integration protocols. His actions in the training hall were a direct result of a gravity calibration error and unauthorized aggression by your son's squad." "Don't give me that scagged-out line of bunk," Crax Toll snapped, his mandibles clicking with a sound like a firing pin. "My son is in a regeneration pod with 15 compound fractures. 2 of his wingmates may never fly again. And you want to tell me it was a slipping accident? I've seen the internal scan, Zant. I've seen what that hairless primate did to a Tier 5 pylon. That's not a student. That's a strike team asset pretending to be a civvy." The holographic projector between them flickered to life, displaying Elias Thorne's official file. Silas Zant watched the data scroll by. The adequate ratings, the logistics track, the unclassified threat level. It looked so fragile now, a thin veil of lies about to be shredded by a very angry insect. "The human embassy is small, Admiral," Silas Zant said, her internal light shifting to a cautious lavender. "They are new to the Great Tiering. Mistakes in documentation are to be expected." "Mistakes?" Crax Toll stepped forward, his heavy, chitinous feet denting the polished floor. "I've had my intelligence officers digging through the subnets for 24 hours. We found something your council friends tried very hard to bury. Elias Thorne isn't a logistics clerk. He's a ranking officer in Earth's Biological Containment Division." "Do you know what they do, Instructor?" Silas Zant remained silent, her 4 eyes fixed on the Admiral. "They don't contain viruses," Crax Toll continued, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly soft rattle. "They contain us. The BCO is a branch of their military designed to monitor alien species and determine how best to neutralize them should Earth be threatened. Thorne isn't here to learn. He's here to assess our weaknesses. He's a ghost operative, and you're his handler." "That is a gross misinterpretation of the BCO's mandate," Silas Zant countered, though she felt a cold shiver run through her core. "Their purpose is peacekeeping. They monitor the cultural and biological friction points between Earth and the hegemony. They ensure that humans don't accidentally violate local laws through physical overexertion." "Peacekeeping?" Crax Toll let out a harsh, whistling laugh. "Is that what you call putting my son in a ceiling? Is that what you call denting reinforced durasteel with a bare hand? Listen to me, Zant. The Vespoid High Command will not allow a Class 7 Deathworlder to walk freely on this station. He is a contagion. The moment other low-tier species see what he can do, they'll start getting ideas. They'll start thinking they can push back. The whole tiering system, 10,000 years of peace, is at risk because of one ape who doesn't know his place." "And what is his place, Admiral?" Silas Zant asked, her light turning a solid, defiant red. "To be bullied by your son? To be treated as a second-class citizen despite having reflexes that make a Vespoid look like a glacier? You aren't afraid of his strength, Admiral. You're afraid of his existence. You're afraid that the hierarchy you've spent your life building is based on a lie." Crax Toll's antennae went rigid. For a moment, the atmosphere in the room felt like it was about to ignite. The Admiral reached out, his primary claw hovering inches from Silas Zant's crystalline chest. You're shattering, Zant, he whispered, his eyes scanning the micro-fractures in her body. I can see the resonance decay. You're old, you're tired, and you're clinging to a student because you have nothing else left. Don't let your final act be a betrayal of the hegemony. Turn the human over to the Vespoid security detail. We'll repatriate him to Earth. Quietly. No more accidents. I have already placed Cadet Thorne in a specialized training track under my direct supervision, Silas Zant said, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell. According to Academy Regulation 47B, an instructor has total jurisdiction over a student's status until the final assessment. Not even an admiral can override that without a vote from the full council. Then we will have a vote, Crack's Tall hissed, retracting his claw. But don't think you can hide him in the dark forever. This station is a closed loop, and there are many ways to make a human slip that don't involve gravity calibration. If I were you, I'd start drafting your retirement speech. You're done, instructor. The Admiral turned and marched out of the sanctum, his heavy footsteps echoing like a countdown. Silas Zant stood alone in the silence, her light fading to a weary, dim violet. She leaned against a pillar, her crystalline hand pressing against her lateral facet. A small piece of glass, no larger than a grain of sand, fell from her body and hit the floor with a tiny, sharp clink. She was dying. She knew that. But as she looked at the grain of glass, she didn't feel the usual hollow dread. She felt a spark of something new, a stubborn, irrational resonance. Elias, she whispered to the empty room, I hope you're as good at being a shield as you are at being a hammer, because the storm just made landfall. She tapped her communicator, the signal routing through 3 different encryption layers to the depths of Sector 9. Elias, pack your gear, she said. We're moving to the transit hub. We have 3 hours before the Vespoids lock down the sublevels. It's time to see if you can handle a crowd without breaking the scenery. The transit hub of the Zenith Spire was a chaotic cathedral of glass and light. It was the heart of the station, where thousands of beings from 100 different species converged to board the maglev shuttles that crisscrossed the mountain. The air was a thick soup of scents, the sharp ammonia of the Glicks, the earthy musk of the Lithans, and the sweet, fermented aroma of the nectar-based Vespoid fuels. Elias Thorne stood near a support pillar, his hood pulled low over his face. He felt like a live wire in a pool of water. Every time someone brushed past him, a spindly Glicks technician or a massive, slow-moving Lithan merchant, his subconscious reflex arc screamed at him. Threat, distance, vector. He had to manually suppress the impulse to shift into a defensive stance, to move before he was touched. Stay calm, Elias. Silas Zant's voice came through his earcom, calm and resonant. She was 50 meters away, blending into the crowd of other Zirconites. The Vespoids aren't looking for a fight in a public space. They want to pick you up quietly. If you stay in the flow, you're just another student. Easy for you to say, Elias muttered, his voice barely a breath. I feel like a heavy hitter in a room full of glass ornaments. One wrong twitch and I'm going to be the lead story on the evening news again. This place is a real cluster, Silas. Language, cadet, she replied, a hint of crystalline humor in her voice. Just focus on your breathing. Remember the exercise in Sector 9. Feel the air. Don't fight it. Elias took a deep breath, trying to ignore the way the high-gravity atmosphere of the spire felt like a heavy blanket on his lungs. To everyone else, this was normal. To him, it was like living in slow motion. He saw a Vespoid patrol move past the main shuttle gate. 4 guards in full riot gear, their stingers buzzing with electrical arcs. They were looking for him, but they were looking for a Deathworlder. Someone aggressive, someone loud. They weren't looking for the slumped, tired-looking human leaning against a pillar. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the maglev platform. A group of 4 young Vespoid cadets, likely friends of Crack's, had cornered a smaller student, a fuzzy, multi-limbed species known as a feline. The feline was a Tier 4 species, traditionally used for clerical and agricultural work. He was trembling, his 4 small hands clutching a data slate to his chest. I have a pass, the feline squeaked, his voice a series of high-pitched chirps. I'm late for the botany lab. Passes can be revoked, one of the Vespoids hissed, his primary arms crossed. He was larger than the others, his exoskeleton a dull, aggressive brown. Especially for bottom feeders who don't know how to yield the walkway? My brother is in medical because of a freak like you. Maybe we should even the score. Elias stiffened. His hand tightened around the strap of his gear bag, the reinforced fabric groaning under the pressure. Elias, don't! Silasant's voice was sharp in his ear. It's a bait trap. They're looking for a reaction. If you engage, you're foobar. We have to make the shuttle. He's just a kid, Silas, Elias whispered. They're gonna bust his thorax just for being in the way. The security droids will intervene, she countered. Maintain your position. But Elias was watching the Vespoid's antennae. He knew that twitch. He'd seen it in Sector 9. It was the precursor to a strike. The Vespoid raised a secondary limb, his claw glinting in the hub's harsh lights. The Phelon let out a terrified wail, cowering against the platform railing. Elias didn't think. He didn't deliberate. The monster in the basement didn't come out this time. Something else did. Something older. A protective instinct that had served his ancestors for 1,000,000 years on a planet that tried to kill them every day. He moved. To the thousands of beings in the transit hub, it looked like a glitch in reality. 1 second, the human was 50 meters away, leaning against a pillar. The next, he was standing between the Phelon and the Vespoid, his hand caught in the midair. There was no sound of impact. Elias had caught the Vespoid's claw with a touch so light it barely disturbed the dust on the creature's exoskeleton. But the Vespoid's limb stopped, as if it had hit a mountain of solid lead. Hey, Elias said, his voice low and raspy. I think the kid said he has a pass. The transit hub fell silent. The thousands of voices, the humming of the shuttles, the clicking of mandibles, all of it ceased as every eye turned toward the center of the platform. The Vespoid cadet tried to pull his arm back. He yanked with the full strength of his primary flight muscles, his wings buzzing in frustration. Elias didn't budge. He stood there, his hood still half covering his face, his expression calm. Let go of me, you hairless skag, the Vespoid screamed, his secondary limbs reaching for a stun baton at his belt. I wouldn't do that, Elias said softly. You're already having a bad day. Don't make it a permanent one. Silasant was there a second later, her crystalline body flashing a brilliant, authoritative gold. Cadets, stand down! This is a violation of the public order code. The other 3 Vespoids backed away, their antennae drooping in fear as they recognized the high instructor. But the one Elias was holding was too far gone in his rage. He swung his other claw, a wild, desperate strike aimed at Elias's face. Elias didn't hit back. He remembered the Sector 9 training. Redirect. Don't break. He stepped into the strike, his shoulder meeting the Vespoid's chest with the gentleness of a falling leaf. But to the Vespoid, it was like being hit by a slow-moving freight train. The momentum of his own strike, combined with Elias's immovable mass, sent the cadet stumbling back 5 meters. He hit the ground hard, his exoskeleton clattering against the metal floor. Elias looked at the Phelon. You okay, kid? Go on, get to your lab. The Phelon didn't wait. He scrambled onto the waiting maglev shuttle, his 4 hands working in a blur of motion as the doors hissed shut. Elias turned back to the Vespoids. He saw the crowd staring at him. He saw the horror in their eyes. Not just the Vespoids, but the Glicks, the Lithans, even the station's security droids. They weren't looking at a hero. They were looking at a predator, a monster that had just moved faster than their nervous systems could process. Elias, Silasant whispered, her light a deeply troubled violet. We have to go, now. Too late, Elias said, glancing toward the main entrance. Admiral Crack's Toll was standing there, surrounded by a dozen Vespoid enforcers in heavy combat hulls. The Admiral's mandibles were clicked into a triumphant sneer. Instructor Zant, the Admiral's voice boomed across the hub. It seems your student has just committed an act of unprovoked violence in a civilian sector. According to the Emergency Security Act, this individual is now classified as an active biohazard. The enforcers raised their weapons, heavy-bore kinetic rifles and high-frequency sonic cannons. The crowd in the hub began to scream, scrambling away from the platform in a frantic wave of limbs and scales. Elias, get behind me, Silasant commanded, her body expanding as she prepared to vent her internal resonance as a shield. No, Elias said. He stepped in front of her, his gear bag falling to the floor with a heavy thud. He pulled back his hood, revealing his face, tired, pale, but entirely resolute. "Admiral," Elias shouted, his voice carrying over the chaos. "You want me? Fine. But leave the instructor out of this. She's just doing her job." "Your job is to be contained, human," Craxtall barked. "Enforcers, secure the asset. Use lethal force if he resists." The first volley of sonic pulses hit the platform. It was a wave of pure, agonizing vibration designed to liquefy internal organs. Silas Sant cried out as the frequency rattled her crystalline structure, sending a fresh wave of microfractures through her body. Elias felt the pulse hit him. To any other species, it would have been a death sentence. To a human from a Class 9 death world, it felt like standing too close to a loud concert speaker. His dense bones and thick muscle tissue absorbed the energy, his adrenaline spiking as his body recognized the threat. He didn't charge. He didn't strike. He simply stood his ground, his feet planted firmly on the metal floor. "Silas, get the shuttle!" Elias yelled over the roar of the sonic cannons. "I'll hold the line." "Elias, you can't!" she screamed, her body pulsing a frantic, jagged red. "I can," he replied, and for the first time, he let the monster fully out. He didn't attack the enforcers. He reached down and grabbed the edge of the maglev platform's reinforced safety railing, a bar of solid durasteel 6 inches thick, designed to stop a runaway shuttle. With a roar of pure, raw exertion, he ripped a 10-meter section of the railing clean out of its anchors. He swung the massive bar of steel in a wide arc, the sheer weight of it creating a localized vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. The sonic pulses were scattered by the physical displacement, the energy dissipated against the immovable mass of the steel. The enforcers froze. They had seen ships hit by asteroids. They had seen planetary crusts buckle under tectonic stress. But they had never seen a single biological organism move 10 tons of steel like it was a wooden stick. "I told you," Elias said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "I'm in logistics, and right now, I'm moving you out of my way." He slammed the steel bar into the floor, the impact creating a localized earthquake that knocked the enforcers off their feet. The floor plates buckled, a jagged rift opening up between Elias and the Admiral. In the confusion, Elias grabbed Silas Sant's arm. "Now! The shuttle!" They dived through the closing doors of the last maglev shuttle, just as a volley of kinetic rounds shredded the air where they had been standing. The shuttle surged forward, its magnets humming as it accelerated toward the upper spires of the mountain. As the transit hub faded into the distance, Elias slumped against the shuttle wall, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving him trembling and cold. He looked at his hands. The skin was torn, his knuckles bleeding from the effort of ripping the steel. "You broke the platform," Silasant said, her voice a soft, vibrating whisper. Her light was a dim, fractured blue. "I had to," Elias said, his voice shaking. "They were gonna kill you, Silas. I couldn't let that happen." "The cost, Elias," she said, looking at him with all 4 eyes. "Do you understand what you've done? You've confirmed every fear they have. To the hegemony, you aren't a student anymore. You aren't even a BCO. You're a monster." Elias looked out the shuttle window at the vast, cold stars of the Ethelgard system. He felt a heavy, hollow weight in his chest, the weight of a man who had tried to be a shield and had ended up becoming a hammer. "I know," he said quietly, "but at least you're still standing. That's a win in my book." Silas Sant leaned her head against the cool glass of the shuttle. She could feel the decay in her body progressing, the internal cracks widening with every breath. She had spent 400 years teaching students to follow the rules, to respect the tiers, to be perfect logical machines. And yet, as she looked at the bleeding, exhausted human beside her, she realized she had never been more proud of a student in her life. "We have 2 hours before the shuttle reaches the Apex Observatory," she said. "The Vespoids will be waiting. We need a plan, Elias. A plan that doesn't involve ripping the station apart." "I have a plan," Elias said, his eyes hardening. "But you're not going to like it. It involves the footnotes." "Which footnotes?" "The ones about how humans can function with blood loss and injury that would kill anything else," he said. "The ones about how we get more dangerous when we're cornered." Admiral cracks toll thinks he's hunting a monster. I think it's time I showed him what a human actually looks like when he stops holding back. Silas Zant's light pulsed once. A sharp, brilliant violet. And what does that look like, Elias? It looks like a nightmare, he replied. But a nightmare with a conscience. And that's the one thing the Admiral isn't prepared for. As the shuttle climbed higher into the thin, frozen air of the mountain's peak, the two outliers, a dying crystal and a Deathworlder with a broken heart, prepared for the final assessment. The great tearing was crumbling, and as it fell, it was leaving behind something much more dangerous and much more beautiful than order. It was leaving behind a choice. The maglev shuttle screamed as it banked against the thinning atmosphere of the Zenith Spire's upper atmosphere. Inside the cabin, the emergency lights pulsed a rhythmic, nauseating amber, casting long, jagged shadows across Elias Thorne's face. He was slumped against the reinforced polymer wall, his chest heaving with a rhythmic, heavy sound that felt entirely too loud in the cramped space. Blood, dark and thick, smeared the seat next to him where his knuckles had grazed the metal. Beside him, Silas Zant was a fading constellation. Her crystalline form, once a vibrant and a steady violet, was now shot through with thousands of tiny silver fractures. Every time the shuttle shuddered, a soft, high-pitched ringing emanated from her body, the sound of a zirconite's soul beginning to vibrate itself into dust. "You're dropping weight, Silas," Elias said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He reached out, his hand hovering near her shoulder, afraid that even a gentle touch might accelerate her decay. "Literally. I can see the dust on the floor. We need to get you to a resonance chamber, and we need to do it fast." "Resonance is a luxury for those with time, Elias," Silas Zant chimed, her voice sounding like a distant bell echoing in a canyon. "The Vespoid interceptors are already locking onto our signature. We have less than 5 minutes before they force a remote override of the shuttle's navigation system. The Apex Observatory is the only hard point left." "The Apex is a glass house," Elias muttered, wiping sweat and grime from his forehead. "It's built for looking at stars, not for a last stand. If we bug out there, we're zeroed. They'll have us boxed in before we can even catch our breath." "It is not about the glass, Cadet. It is about the altitude," Silas replied, her light pulsing a weary, determined blue. "At 30 kilometers above the surface, the oxygen levels are negligible. The Vespoids rely on high-frequency wing vibrations for stability. In the thin air of the apex, they will be sluggish. You, however, your lungs are designed for the high-altitude peaks of your death world. You will have the advantage of breath." Elias let out a sharp, cynical laugh. "Great. I can breathe while they shoot me. That's a real win-win." He checked his gear bag, pulling out the Cortex Link device. "Silas, listen to me. This whole op is going south fast. If the Admiral catches us at the apex, he isn't going to read us our rights. He's going to turn us into a cautionary tale. I can hold them off, but I won't be able to do it quietly, not anymore." "I know," Silas said, her 4 eyes turning to meet his, "but I have spent 400 years judging beings by their tier rankings. I have seen the galaxy as a hierarchy of strength. But you showed me something else in the transit hub. You didn't move that steel to kill. You moved it to protect. That is the choice, Elias. It is the only thing that separates a soldier from a butcher." "Choices are expensive, Silas," Elias whispered. Suddenly, the shuttle groaned. A violent shudder rocked the craft as a magnetic grapple beam locked onto their rear thrusters. The view outside the windows shifted from the dark indigo of the upper atmosphere to the blinding white of a Vespoid dropship's floodlights. "Remote override initiated," a mechanical voice announced over the shuttle's intercom. "Docking sequence engaged. Prepare for boarding." Elias stood up, his body uncoiling like a massive, tension-loaded spring. He didn't look like a logistics student anymore. The adrenaline was beginning to flow, a chemical fire that sharpened his vision until the world seemed to move in slow motion. He could hear the individual clicks of the docking clamps, the hiss of the pressurized seals, and the frantic, high-pitched buzzing of Vespoid wings on the other side of the door. "Silas, stay behind the main console," Elias commanded, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Don't move. No matter what you hear, don't move." "Elias, I'm zeroed in, instructor," he said, turning to face the airlock. Time to show them why humans have footnotes. The airlock hissed open. A squad of 6 Vespoid enforcers surged into the cabin, their heavy kinetic rifles raised, their stingers humming with lethal electrical arcs. They were the Admiral's elite, their carapaces reinforced with carbon fiber plating. "Asset located," the lead enforcer barked, his mandibles clicking with predatory excitement. "Surrender now, primate, or we'll vent this cabin into the void." Elias didn't respond with words. He didn't even take a traditional combat stance. He simply stepped forward. The lead enforcer fired a kinetic slug. In the tight confines of the shuttle, the sound was deafening. But to Elias, the projectile was a lazy, drifting insect. He pivoted his torso by exactly 3 centimeters, the slug whistling past his ribs and burying itself in the seat behind him. Before the enforcer could cycle his weapon, Elias was there. He didn't punch. A punch would have shattered the Vespoid's chest and sent shards of chitin into the shuttle's hull. Instead, he grabbed the barrel of the rifle with one hand and the enforcer's primary wrist with the other. With a movement so fluid it looked like a dance, he twisted. The rifle snapped in half like a dry twig. The enforcer let out a whistling scream of pain as his primary arm was pinned behind his back. Elias didn't stop. He used the enforcer as a living shield, swinging the heavy insectoid body into the 2 guards behind him. The impact was like 2 shuttlecraft colliding. Chitin cracked, and the Vespoids were sent flying back into the airlock. Their formation shattered. "Close the seal, Silas," Elias roared. Silas Zant's fingers blurred over the console. The airlock doors slammed shut, severing the grapple beam and cutting off the next wave of boarders. But the shuttle was damaged, its stabilization fins sheared off in the struggle. It began a violent, tumbling descent toward the Apex Observatory's landing pad. "Brace!" Elias yelled, lunging across the cabin to shield Silas Zant with his own body. The world turned into a chaotic vortex of noise and impact. The shuttle hit the landing pad at 200 kilometers an hour, skidding across the reinforced glass of the observatory. The sound of metal screaming against glass filled the air, 1,000 knives scraping across a chalkboard. The cabin crumpled, the reinforced polymer windows shattering into millions of fragments. Then there was silence. Elias groaned, his vision swimming in a sea of red. He was pinned beneath a heavy section of the ceiling, his left arm trapped, his ribs screaming with every breath. He could taste copper in his mouth. He looked down at Silas Zant, who was cradled in the curve of his body. She was still. Her light had faded to a dull, ash gray. "Silas!" Elias wheezed, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Silas, talk to me. Don't check out on me now. Not like this." A faint trembling chime echoed from her chest. One of her eyes flickered open, the crystal surface clouded and cracked. "Still, here, cadet, impact, force, exceeded, safety parameters." "Yeah, tell me about it," Elias said, a grimace of pain crossing his face. He looked up through the wreckage. The shuttle had come to rest in the center of the Apex Observatory, a vast domed chamber of glass and steel that hung over the edge of the mountain like a frozen teardrop. Outside, the Vespoid dropships were descending like hungry wasps. Hundreds of them. Elias pulled his trapped arm. He felt the bone groan, the skin tearing, but his adrenaline-fueled brain simply bypassed the pain. With a roar of pure, animalistic defiance, he shoved the ceiling section off his body. The metal groaned and buckled as he stood up, his uniform shredded, his skin covered in a map of bruises and lacerations. He reached down and gently lifted Silas Zant. She felt lighter than she had an hour ago, as if her very substance was evaporating. He carried her to a stone pedestal in the center of the room, a base for a telescope that had long since been removed. "Listen to me, Silas," Elias said, leaning her against the stone. "I'm going out there. I'm going to end this." "Elias, the Admiral, he wants the monster," Silas whispered, her hand trembling as it touched his arm. "Don't give it to him." "I'm not giving him anything," Elias said, his eyes turning toward the observatory's main entrance. "I'm just going to show him what a Class 7 predator looks like when he's had a really, really bad day." He turned away, his footsteps heavy and purposeful. Behind him, the first of the Vespoid dropships touched down on the landing pad. The doors opened, and Admiral Crax Toll stepped out, followed by 50 enforcers in heavy assault hulls. The Admiral looked at the wreckage of the shuttle, then at the lone human standing in the center of the glass dome. He clicked his mandibles in a slow, rhythmic pattern of triumph. "It ends here, Thorn," the Admiral's voice boomed through his translator, echoing off the glass walls. "You have nowhere left to run, no more instructors to hide behind, no more lies about logistics." Elias didn't move. He stood in the center of the apex, the cold wind of the mountain whistling through the shattered windows. He looked at the Admiral, then at the army of insects surrounding him. "You're right, Admiral," Elias said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "No more lies. No more holding back. But before we start, I want you to look at something." Elias pointed toward Silasant, her fading form a pale ghost against the stone. "That's a 400-year-old instructor who spent her life trying to make this galaxy a better place," Elias said, his voice trembling with a suppressed rage. "She's dying because of your pride, because you couldn't stand the idea of something you didn't understand. You call me a monster? Look in a mirror, you scagged-out coward." Crax Toll's antennae went rigid with fury. "Lethal force! Kill him! Now!" The 50 enforcers raised their rifles. The air in the observatory hummed with the sound of charging capacitors. Elias Thorn didn't flinch. He didn't run. He took one deep, cold breath of the thin mountain air, and for the first time in his life, he let the adrenaline gate open all the way. The world didn't just slow down, it stopped. The first volley of kinetic slugs ripped through the air, traveling at 3,000 meters per second. In the time it took for the first slug to travel 1 meter, Elias Thorn's brain had already processed the trajectory of every projectile in the room. To Admiral Crax Toll, the human simply disappeared. There was a sound like a thunderclap, a sudden, violent displacement of air that shattered the remaining glass in the observatory's dome. Elias wasn't running, he was leaping. He pushed off the marble floor with enough force to create a crater 1 meter deep, his body a blur of raw kinetic energy. He didn't move toward the enforcers. He moved toward the ceiling. He caught a reinforced steel support beam 30 meters above the floor, his fingers digging into the metal like it was soft clay. He swung his body with a momentum that would have sheared the joints of any other species, and then he let go. He descended on the first squad of enforcers like a falling star. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't need one. He landed in the center of their formation, the impact creating a shock wave that sent the Vespoids flying in every direction. The floor beneath him buckled, the reinforced glass cracking under the sheer weight of his landing. "Form up!" Crax Toll screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "Surround him! Use the sonic cannons!" 2 enforcers stepped forward, their heavy shoulder-mounted cannons humming as they prepared to fire. Elias didn't give them the chance. He lunged forward, his feet barely touching the floor. He grabbed the barrel of the first cannon and with a single sharp jerk, ripped the entire weapon assembly off the enforcer's shoulder. He didn't throw it. He used it as a club. He swung the 300-kilogram cannon in a wide horizontal arc. It caught the second squad of enforcers mid-charge, the sound of breaking chitin and groaning metal filling the dome. Vespoids were tossed aside like autumn leaves in a gale. Elias was moving with a speed that defied the laws of biology, a nightmare of brown hair, torn fabric, and unstoppable force. But the Admiral wasn't finished. "The gas! Release the neurotoxin!" A series of canisters hissed as they were tossed into the dome, releasing a thick green cloud of Vespoid neurotoxin. It was a chemical designed to paralyze the nervous system of any oxygen-breathing organism in seconds. Elias felt the gas hit his lungs. It burned like liquid fire, his throat tightening, his vision blurring. His subconscious reflex arc screamed for him to stop, to collapse, to surrender. But he remembered footnote 82. Humans can function with blood loss and injury that would kill most species. They have something called adrenaline that lets them ignore injury and temporarily exceed their physical parameters. Elias didn't stop. He pushed harder. His heart was hammering at 300 beats per minute, his body temperature rising until he was literally steaming in the cold mountain air. He closed his eyes, relying on the sound of the Admiral's frantic breathing, the vibration of the enforcer's wings, and the smell of the ozone. He moved through the green cloud like a vengeful ghost. Every time a Vespoid tried to strike him, he was already gone. He was a force of nature, a biological anomaly that the hegemony had no answer for. He reached the Admiral. Crack's Toll tried to draw his ceremonial vibroblade, but his secondary limbs were trembling so hard he couldn't get a grip. He looked up, his compound eyes wide with a terror that transcended rank and species. Standing before him, through the swirling green mist, was Elias Thorne. The human skin was a bruised, angry red. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair matted with sweat and dust. He was bleeding from a dozen different wounds, and his chest was heaving with a ragged whistling sound. But he was standing, and he was holding the mangled barrel of a sonic cannon in one hand. "Admiral," Elias rasped, the word sounding like it was being dragged through broken glass. Crackstoll fell to his knees, his antennae drooping in total submission. "Monster, you are a monster." Elias raised the heavy metal club. He could end it right now. One strike, and the head of the Vespoid High Command would be nothing but a memory. The Admiral deserved it. He had hunted them. He had hurt Silas. He had tried to destroy everything Elias had worked for. In that moment, the monster in the basement was screaming for blood. The adrenaline was a hot, toxic sludge in his veins, demanding release. Kill him. End the threat. Protect yourself. Elias's hand tightened on the metal. He looked at the Admiral's terrified face, and then he looked past him, toward the center of the dome. Silas Zant was watching him. Her light was a tiny, flickering spark, but her eyes were clear. She wasn't looking at him with horror. She was looking at him with expectation. She was waiting to see if her 400 years of teaching had meant anything. She was waiting to see the choice. Elias's breath hitched in his chest. The red mist in his vision began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He looked at the Admiral, a small, arrogant insect who was so afraid of the unknown that he was willing to burn the galaxy to keep it away. If Elias killed him, he wouldn't be proving that humans were reasonable. He would be proving that they were exactly what the Admiral feared. He would be confirming the prejudice. Elias let out a long, slow breath, the green gas burning his throat one last time. He opened his hand. The mangled sonic cannon fell to the floor with a heavy, resonant clang. The sound echoed through the observatory, a final, definitive period at the end of a long sentence. "I'm not a monster, Admiral," Elias said, his voice quiet but carrying more weight than any explosion. "And I'm not your enemy. I'm just a guy who's tired of being judged by people who are too scared to look me in the eye." Elias turned his back on the Admiral, a gesture of absolute, terrifying trust. He walked toward the stone pedestal where Silas Sant lay. The enforcers who were still standing didn't fire. They didn't move. They watched in a stunned, respectful silence as the human knelt beside the dying Zirconite. "Silas," Elias whispered, reaching out to take her hand. His touch was as light as a feather, his massive strength retracted into the deepest recesses of his being. "It's over. I didn't break him." A soft, melodic chime echoed from Silas Sant's body. Her light shifted, for one brief, brilliant second, into a perfect, flawless violet. The micro-fractures seemed to smooth over, her resonance stabilizing in the presence of his touch. "You chose the shield," she whispered, her voice a warm breeze in the cold room. "My best student." "Don't start with the grades now, Silas," Elias said, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. "We still have the finals to worry about." "You just passed the finals," she replied, her eyes slowly closing. "The galaxy is watching, Elias. Show them how to walk softly." Her light didn't fade out. It dispersed, a million tiny glowing fragments of violet glass rising from her body and floating toward the shattered dome. They mingled with the starlight, a cloud of shimmering memory that lit up the mountain's peak. Silas Sant was gone, but her resonance remained, a lingering vibration in the air that felt like hope. Elias Thorne sat on the cold floor of the Apex Observatory, his head bowed. He felt empty, exhausted, and more alone than he had ever been in his life. But he didn't feel like a monster. For the first time since leaving Sol 3, He felt like a human being. Behind him, Admiral Crack's Toll stood up, his limbs shaking. He looked at the enforcers, then at the human who had spared his life. He saw the shimmering violet dust in the air, and he saw the cratered floor and the shattered glass. The Admiral didn't give the order to fire. He didn't say a word. He simply turned and walked back to his dropship, his head bowed. The enforcers followed him, their weapons lowered, their predatory buzzing replaced by a low, somber hum. The Zenith Spire was silent. The Deathworld contagion had claimed its first victory, not with a strike, but with a stay of execution. The Great Tearing hadn't been destroyed by force, it had been made irrelevant by a choice. Elias Thorne stood up slowly. He looked at his hands, then at the empty stone pedestal. He picked up his gear bag, slinging it over his shoulder. He walked toward the edge of the dome, looking out over the clouds and the stars. The galaxy was a vast, cold, and often cruel place. It was filled with prejudice, fear, and hierarchies built on sand. But as the sun began to rise over the peaks of Ethelgard, casting a golden light across the ruins of the observatory, Elias Thorne knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to be a ghost anymore. He was going to be a footnote that no one could ever ignore. "Time to go home," he whispered to the wind. He stepped out of the wreckage, walking toward the landing pad. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He walked with a heavy, steady tread, his feet leaving marks in the stone that would remain for 1,000 years. The human was moving, and for the first time the galaxy wasn't afraid. The violet dust of Silas Sant did not settle. It lingered in the thin, crystalline air of the Apex Observatory, catching the first amber rays of the dawn. Elias Thorne stood alone in the center of the ruin, his hands still trembling, not from the exertion of the fight, but from the terrifying ease with which he had nearly ended it. The heavy durasteel railing he had used as a club lay 10 meters away, a twisted monument to a strength he had spent a lifetime trying to bury. The silence was absolute. The Vespoid dropships had vanished into the cloud layer, their engines a dying hum in the distance. Admiral Crack's Toll had left more than just his pride on the landing pad. He had left the illusion of his own absolute authority. For 400 years, the Zirconite instructor had taught that order was a product of hierarchy. In 5 minutes of raw, restrained violence, Elias had proven that order was actually a product of choice. He knelt by the stone pedestal, his knees popping with the protest of overstressed tendons. His uniform was little more than scorched rags, and the green neurotoxin had left a bitter, metallic film on his tongue. He reached out, his fingers brushing the surface where Silas had spent her final moments. There was a faint vibration in the stone, a lingering resonance that felt like a whisper in the back of his mind. "I'm still here, Silas," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I didn't check out. Not yet." A soft chime echoed from the shadows of the doorway. Elias didn't turn. He knew the rhythm of those footsteps, too light for a Vespoid, too frantic for a Lithan. It was Dr. Vrel. The Glix medic skittered into the room, his 12 limbs clicking nervously against the shattered glass. He stopped several meters away, his bulbous eyes taking in the carnage, the craters in the floor, the bent support beams, and the lone human who looked like he had been put through a planetary ore grinder. "Cadet Thorne," Vrel chirped, his voice a frantic series of clicks. "The station sensors, they recorded a seismic event. I thought the apex had collapsed. My scanners are reporting localized gravitational anomalies consistent with a Class 5 kinetic impact." "The apex is still standing, Doc," Elias said, slowly rising to his feet. Every muscle in his body felt like it was being pulled by a different winch. "But I think the instructor's syllabus needs an update." Vrel skittered closer, his medical array humming as he performed a remote scan. "Your internal temperature is 41 degrees Celsius. Your heart rate is still 140. Elias, you should be in a coma. The amount of adrenaline in your system would have vaporized the nervous system of a Vespoid. And the neurotoxin, you inhaled enough to paralyze a small moon." "I'm a Deathworlder, Vrel. Remember?" Elias managed a weak, painful grin. "We don't do things the easy way. We just keep moving until the floor runs out." Vrel's limbs curled inward, a gesture of profound unease. "The Admiral is already filing his report to the High Council. He's calling for a total containment order. He says you are a contagion, that your presence has already corrupted the lower tiers." Corrupted? Elias looked toward the transit hub far below. I saved a Phelan kid from getting his thorax crushed. If that's corruption, then this whole galaxy is scagged beyond repair. It's not the act, Elias, Vrel said, his voice dropping to a somber frequency. It's the implication. You showed them that a Tier 7 can defy a Tier 1. You showed them that the great tiering is a choice, not a law of nature. The Council is terrified. They don't know how to categorize mercy from a predator. They understand a monster that kills. They have no protocol for a monster that stops. Elias walked toward the shattered dome, looking out over the peaks of Ethelgard. He could see the lights of the zenith spire beginning to flicker as the station's morning cycle commenced. Somewhere down there, thousands of beings were waking up to a world that was fundamentally different than the one they had fallen asleep in. Silas knew, Elias said quietly. She knew the hierarchy was a cage. She spent 400 years watching people hide their potential because they were told it didn't fit their tier. She didn't stay by my side because I was strong. She stayed because I was afraid of being strong. She saw the monster in the basement and told me it was okay to let it breathe as long as I held the leash. She was a fool, Vrel chirped, though there was no malice in his tone. A brilliant, resonance-mad fool. She sacrificed her final cycle for a footnote. She sacrificed it for a future, Elias corrected. He turned to face the medic. Vrel, I'm going to the council. I'm going to give them the assessment they've been waiting for. Elias, no! Vrel's limbs flailed in alarm. They'll zero you. The Admiral has already authorized lethal containment. If you walk into that chamber, you're walking into a grave. I've been in a grave for 6 months, Doctor. It's called being adequate, Elias said, his voice hardening. I'm tired of hiding. Silas didn't turn into dust just so I could go back to moving boxes. Tell the council the human is coming, and tell them I'm bringing the footnotes with me. As Elias walked past the medic, he paused by the entrance. He reached into his gear bag and pulled out a small, shimmering fragment of violet glass he had found near the pedestal. It was the only piece of Silas Zant that hadn't dispersed into the atmosphere. He tucked it into the pocket over his heart. The walk back to the administrative sanctum was the longest of his life. He didn't take the private lifts or the service tunnels. He walked through the public concourses, his tattered uniform and blood-stained skin a jarring contrast to the pristine hallways of the upper spires. He passed groups of students, Lithans who towered over him, Glicks who scuttled out of his way, and even a few Vespoids who went perfectly still as he passed. But they weren't looking at him with the same fear they had yesterday. There was a new quality to their silence, a hesitant, wide-eyed curiosity. The Phelan cadet from the transit hub was there, standing near a water fountain. As Elias passed, the small creature raised one of his 4 hands in a silent, shaky salute. Elias didn't smile, but he nodded. It was a small victory, but in a galaxy built on prejudice, a nod between a predator and a prey species was a tectonic shift. He reached the heavy obsidian doors of the sanctum. 2 Vespoid enforcers stood guard, their kinetic rifles crossing to bar his path. They looked at his shredded uniform, his bruised face, and the terrifying steady fire in his eyes. Their stingers buzzed, but their hands were shaking. I'm here for the hearing, Elias said, his voice echoing in the grand hallway. The hearing is private, one guard stammered. Not anymore, Elias replied. He didn't push them. He didn't use his strength. He simply waited. The doors hissed open. Admiral Crack's Toll stood on the other side, his expression a mask of cold indigo fury. Behind him, the holographic projections of the High Council shimmered. A dozen different species, all of them leaning forward, their eyes fixed on the human who had broken their world. Let him in, the Admiral commanded, his voice a dry rasp. Let the Deathworlder speak. It's time we finish this. Elias stepped into the chamber, his heavy boots thudding against the polished marble. He stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the most powerful beings in the hegemony. He looked small, battered, and utterly outclassed. But as he looked up at the council, he didn't feel like a monster. He felt like a teacher. The High Council chamber of the Zenith Spire was designed to make any individual feel like an ant beneath the heel of history. The ceiling was a dome of deep space, showing the stars of the Ethelgard system in real time. while the walls were lined with the statues of the great Tier 1 founders. The air was cold, recycled to a clinical purity that bit at Elias's lungs. Elias Thorne, the High Counselor, a Torvin with 6 eyes that blinked in a slow, judgmental sequence, began. His voice was a booming projection that rattled the floor. You stand accused of unprovoked violence, destruction of Academy property, and the intentional destabilization of the hegemony's social order. Admiral Crax Toll has recommended your immediate summary execution and the total quarantine of Sol 3. Elias looked at the Admiral. Crax Toll stood rigid, his primary claws gripping the edge of his rank mantle. There was no triumph in the Vespoid's eyes, only a desperate, clinging fear. I've read the Admiral's report, Elias said, his voice quiet but perfectly clear. It didn't need a projector to carry. It's a good read. Lots of action. A bit light on the context, though. The context is your nature, human, Crax Toll barked, his mandibles clicking. You are an apex predator from a Class 9 Deathworld. You have the strength to shatter our ships and the speed to erase our guards. You have spent months infiltration this academy, hiding your capabilities. You are a biological weapon masquerading as a student. I was a BCO, Admiral. I already told you that, Elias said, turning to the council. And I wasn't hiding. I was trying to integrate. I was trying to show you that a human can be a part of your galaxy without breaking it. But you wouldn't let me. You wanted a monster. You pushed and you poked and you bullied until the monster finally had to come out and save a feline kid from getting his skull caved in. You destroyed a Tier 5 pylon, a council member shouted. You ripped the railing off a transit platform. You incapacitated an elite squad in the apex. And yet, Elias said, stepping forward, his eyes burning with a sharp, clear light, the Admiral is still alive. My fellow students are in regeneration pods, not body bags. I had every opportunity to kill every Vespoid in that observatory. I had the adrenaline, I had the toxin in my lungs, and I had the motivation, but I didn't do it. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out the violet glass fragment. He held it up, the starlight from the dome catching its facets. Instructor Silas Zant taught me for 4 months. She was a zirconite, a Tier 2 species according to your books. She was supposed to be my superior, but she didn't treat me like a threat or a tool. She treated me like a person. She taught me that the greatest power isn't the ability to crush something. It's the ability to choose not to. He looked directly at Crax Toll. You're afraid of the Deathworld contagion, Admiral, but you're looking at the wrong thing. The contagion isn't my strength. It's my mercy. Because if a Class 9 predator can choose to be kind, then what's your excuse for being a tyrant? The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against the council like a physical weight. The Torvin counselor blinked all 6 eyes. Admiral Crax Toll, the counselor said slowly, is it true? Did the human spare your life when he had the clear advantage? Crax Toll's antennae drooped. His indigo exoskeleton seemed to lose its luster. Yes, he whispered, the word a bitter rasp. He dropped his weapon. He walked away. The great tiering is based on the idea that strength dictates order, the counselor said, his voice losing its booming authority. But if strength is used for restraint, then the tiers lose their meaning. If a Tier 7 can show more discipline than a Tier 1, then our hierarchy is a lie. Elias took another step forward. It's not a lie. It's just incomplete. You've spent 10,000 years measuring what people are. You never bothered to measure what they do. My people come from a world where everything is trying to kill us. We survived because we learned to work together, even when we hated each other. We learned that being the strongest doesn't mean you're the leader. It just means you're the one who has to carry the heaviest load. Elias set the violet fragment on the council's central table. I'm not a logistics student anymore, and I'm not a BCO. I'm a Deathworlder who just passed his final exam. My assessment is this. The hegemony doesn't need a quarantine. It needs an education. It needs to stop looking at tiers and start looking at choices. Suram, the Torvin counselor, looked at the glass fragment, then at Elias. And what do you propose, Elias Thorne? Keep the Deathworlder category, Elias said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. But don't make it a threat assessment. Make it a training track. Send your best here, not to learn how to fight like me, but to learn how to live with me. Let me teach them what Silas taught me. Let me show them how to walk softly. The council shimmered as they entered a private communication frequency. For 10 minutes, Elias stood in the center of the room, his body aching, his vision blurry with exhaustion. He looked at the statues of the founders, and for the first time, they didn't look like titans. They looked like people who had been afraid of the dark. Finally, the Torvin counselor spoke. The council has reached a decision. Admiral Crackstoll's recommendation for execution is denied. The Academy's integration protocols will be revised. Cadet Elias Thorne is hereby promoted to the rank of resident instructor of the newly formed Resonant Path Initiative. Elias felt the air leave his lungs in a long, shaky breath. He had done it. He hadn't just survived. He had changed the trajectory of 1,000 species. There is one condition, the counselor added. You will be under constant observation. If the monster ever comes out without a leash, if you ever use your strength for unprovoked aggression, the spire will be vented. Do you accept? I've been living with that condition my whole life, Elias said. I accept. The Admiral turned without a word and walked out of the chamber, his footsteps hollow. He was a man out of time, a relic of a tearing system that was now officially in its twilight. Elias walked out of the sanctum an hour later. He wasn't escorted by guards this time. He was alone. He made his way to the outer balconies of the spire, where the air was cold and the view was infinite. He leaned against the railing, carefully, gently, and looked out at the stars of the Ethelgard system. The sun was fully up now, painting the mountain in shades of gold and copper. He reached into his pocket and realized he had left the violet glass fragment on the table. He didn't need it anymore. The resonance was inside him now. He thought about his journey, from the grimy shipyards of Sol 3 to the sterile halls of Zenith Spire. He thought about the boxes he had moved, the notes he had taken, and the people he had put in the ceiling. He thought about the fear he had felt every morning, the fear of losing control, of becoming the thing everyone expected him to be. He took a deep breath, the air no longer burning. It felt like home. I spent 20 years back on Earth trying to be small. I used to think that my strength was a curse, a mistake of evolution that made me a danger to the people I loved. I stayed in the corners, I kept my head down, and I let people call me average because it was safer than letting them see the truth. I thought that being human meant being a monster with a conscience, forever fighting an internal war that no one else could understand. But Silas Sant saw through all that bunk. She didn't see a monster, she saw a student. She taught me that our flaws, our jagged edges, and our dangerous potentials aren't things we should hide. They're the parts of us that require the most care. She showed me that true courage isn't found in a fist or a rifle. It's found in the moment you realize you could burn the world down, but you choose to plant a garden instead. We all have a basement where we keep the things that scare us about ourselves. But we don't have to live in the dark with them. We can bring them into the light, give them a name, and learn to walk beside them. I'm still a Deathworlder. I'm still the most dangerous thing on this station. But for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of what I can do. I'm excited for what I can choose. Elias looked at his hands. They were scarred, bruised, and human. He turned and saw a group of new cadets arriving at the transit hub below. They were from a dozen different worlds, all of them looking up at the spire with fear and wonder. He straightened his back, his shoulders broad and steady. He had a class to prepare for. He had a galaxy to teach. I have spent my life learning to pull my punches so the world wouldn't break around me. But I wonder, as you look at the strengths and the sharp edges you hide within yourself, what would happen if you stopped seeing them as a threat? What would change in your world if you decided to lead with your mercy instead of your power? Elias Thorne turned away from the stars and began the long walk back down to the training mats. He walked softly, his feet barely making a sound on the stone, the master of his own gravity at last.